Hey, thank you all so much for joining us to celebrate Prairie Up, an introduction to natural garden design. My name is Heather, and I'm the Senior Publicity Manager at the University of Illinois Press. And I'm just going to go over some brief logistical information before we get started. First of all, thank you so much to Benjamin for being here today. He's going to do a presentation for us, and we'll answer questions from the audience at the end of the event. You can enter questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can use promo code Prairie Up to get a 40% discount on the book on the University of Illinois Press website. I'll put the promo code and a link to the book in the chat box. We will also be recording the event and posting it on our YouTube channel afterwards. You'll receive an email from Zoom after the event that will have both the discount code and a link to our YouTube channel as well. We're also going to give away 2 copies of Prairie Up to 2 lucky winners. So we will pick the winners at the end of the event, and I will email you afterwards to get your addresses so I can send you a copy of the book. And now I will just briefly introduce Benjamin. Benjamin Vogt is the owner of Monarch Gardens, a prairie-inspired design firm based in the Midwest, and author of the disruptive Call to Action, a new garden ethic, Cultivating Defiant Compassion for an Uncertain Future. Benjamin's award-winning writing and photography have appeared in some 100 publications, including The American Gardener, Fine Gardening, Garden Design, Houzz, Midwest Living, Orion, and a variety of literary and gardening books. As a sought-after speaker, he presents widely on artful and ecologically meaningful design for both wildlife and people, helping us to rethink pretty in a time of climate disruption. A native of Oklahoma and raised in Minnesota, Benjamin has an MFA from The Ohio State University and a PhD from the University of Nebraska. He lives in Lincoln on a reprairie suburban lot with his wife and son. And for those of you who are interested, Benjamin is going to be offering a 4-part garden design workshop series that starts this Saturday. So I'll also put the link to that in the chat for you where you can find more information. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Benjamin. Benjamin, thanks again to everyone for being here today.
Thank you so much, Heather. I'll get over here and share the presentation for us all. All right, so again, thank you for joining me today. If you're having a really good lunch, please send it to me. My address is, I'm not going to tell you. Well, let's just get started. We got a lot of ground to cover, and I want to leave plenty of time for some question and answer session. I know that's very valuable, and it's always a lot of fun. So, all right, so. Oh crap! That's the wrong presentation. That's my centerfold presentation I did for the United Nations the other week. That's not what you're here for. You're here for this. We're going to talk about unlawning America, right? Converting lawns to prairie gardens. This is headquarters. You'll see a lot of images of headquarters, but also a lot of other client spaces, just the same as in the book. Few different ones. So all these little green blips on this picture here in this map of the United States, this is lawn, primarily urban and suburban lawn. We have 63,000 square miles of lawn in the United States. You put that all together, that's roughly the size of the state of Georgia, so it's quite significant. We use around 20 trillion gallons of water to irrigate our lawns every year. 30, comparatively speaking, that's 30. We use 30 trillion gallons of water for all of our U.S. food crops. So we're basically putting 2/3 of what we use to feed ourselves onto a space that we don't use to feed ourselves. It's a travesty. 5,000 acres per day are converted to lawn. That's an older number that might even be faster. It's half the rate of Amazon rainforest destruction, and that's an incredibly terrible pace right there. More positive, wonderful things you don't want to get tattoos of because it's so depressing. Of 30 commonly used lawn pesticides, 19 linked to cancer, 13 to birth defects, 21 to reproductive disorders, 15 to brain damage. Of those, 17 are detected in groundwater, 11 are toxic to bees, 16 are toxic to birds. Can't believe it's not more than that. Idling a leaf blower. We should all take sledgehammers to leaf blowers. For 10 minutes produces as much toxic exhaust as driving a large pickup truck, Ford F-150 or something, for 235 miles. I live out here in Nebraska. There's no point to use a leaf blower. It's always so windy, 30, 40 mile per hour winds. Leaves don't stay where you want them to go anyway. And we want them in our gardens. That's where we want them, adding fresh layer of soil. Now, less than 2% of the original tallgrass prairie remains. That's where I find myself. That's where I've mostly grown up in my life, is a tallgrass prairie region. The tallgrass is then more threatened in the Amazon and Indonesian rainforests combined. 70% of all U.S. grasslands may be gone by 2100. Now, let's look at some maps because we are not just talking about the Midwest today. We're talking about everywhere. but we are most familiar with the Great Plains. This is the original extent of the Great Plains. So got that picture in your mind, dark green. Brown is everything that's been eradicated, primarily grasslands and meadows and prairies and all that stuff, because it's really easy to plow up and put cornfields into. Dark green on this map is relatively intact habitat or fairly intact habitat, and this map is 18 years old, so it's certainly gotten worse since then. You can see the Flint Hills there in eastern Kansas, that north-south oval, and then 1/4 of the state of Nebraska, where I'm talking to you from today. That's the Sand Hills up there in north-central Nebraska. It's really hard to farm on sand dunes, so we're lucky to have that habitat here. Now, there are prairies everywhere in the United States. There are grasslands everywhere. So I talked about the Great Plains, the tall grass, mixed grass, short grass. That's my home. But we have others here in the Southwest, the West, and the Northwest. We have lots of grass. We have a rich grassland history in the Southeast, the southeastern United States. There are prairies everywhere down there as well. We even have the Hempstead Plains, Long Island of New York City area. Prairie is everywhere is what I'm telling you. And what I'm especially telling you is if you have lawn that you want to convert to a prairie style, meadow style garden, you already have a prairie space. That's what the lawn is. It's been subdued and made into a prairie space. You are ready to go. Couple native plant facts. These you can get tattoos of. I think that's cool. Native plants provide 15 to 35 times the caterpillar biomass versus exotics. They support 35 or 3,500 or more native bee species that have longer flight times than are non-native honeybees. They provide specific pollination like buzz, which increases fruit yield, quality, and shelf life. Native plants are, when properly sited, adapted to local regional climates. Their blooms are in sync with emerging insects throughout the year as those insects are completing their life cycles. They support specialist insects that are so critical to our ecosystems. Specialists that require, specific flower species for pollen. They only use pollen from that species or genus. And of course, things like monarch butterflies, black swallowtails, their larvae depend on foliage of specific plants. Kids today will see 35% fewer butterflies and moths than their parents did 40 years ago. I can't imagine what my 4-year-old son is going to see in 40 years. I feel like he's practically going to see nothing, a couple robins and some worms or something, I don't know. We have 50% fewer birds than we did 40 years ago. 230 of our North American bird species are at risk of extinction within the next few decades. And now 96% of songbirds feed only insects to their young. So we got these baby birds in the nest for 2 weeks and they're only eating insects and they're eating spiders, whatever their parents can forage for. Hundreds and hundreds of these things every day per baby bird. So we need these native plants, right? We know this, that's why we're here. Here's a bunch of specialist insect species right here. If you can identify all of these, email and I will send you nothing as a prize. All right, so by 2050, over 70% of us here in the United States are going to live in urban areas. So that's not just like downtown skyscrapers. This is also including suburban core areas. And these places have greatly diminished green space. You're more likely to find green space in more well-to-do sections of our city spaces. Plants clean the air, the water, the soil. They reduce stormwater runoff, cool structures. They have so many ecosystem benefits for us and for wildlife. Now, views of complex nature, they increase the mental and physical health of school children, office workers, patients in hospitals. Every time I drive by a school and I see nothing but lawn outside, I don't see something that's beneficial for the safety of the kids. I see something that's detrimental for the kids and their learning and all the clean air they need. And God, it's just so, yeah, it's depressing. So well-designed, diversified landscapes raise home values and spur community engagement while reducing crime. Having shrubbery is not going to create a place for murderers to come get you. It's going to create a place of calm and health and well-being. We need to convert spaces like this. This is 3 acres right behind my suburban lot. We need to convert these spaces, make them look more like this. We need to go from, I don't know, state capitol buildings with acres of lawn, get them to look more like this. Let's take parking lots or areas of parking lots that we don't use, that maintenance crews hate to mow because the incline is at 45 degrees and they don't want to roll over and die on the mowers. Let's convert these spaces into flowering meadows. Even a small space out their front door can do a lot of wonderful things. And these spaces do wonderful things throughout the year when you leave the plant standing. More inspiration for you, right? There's a bird bath there in the middle. Good to have a water source for our avian friends. Business building there on the left, another image of front yard at headquarters there on the right. A client's shade meadow, where our matrix, our primary ground cover is sedge species, carex, and the forbs have yet to mature because carex always gets a jump start on those plants. Another client space where they said they don't want a speck of lawn in their front yard after they finished building their house, and we embraced and had a party and had a good time. So these landscapes are all about planting with nature, planting like nature. Nature is helping us design the space. But what does that mean when we're talking about planting like nature? We want thick layered gardens using native plant communities, not native plant specimens, but communities, plants that evolve together to grow well together and sustain one another. This is going to increase habitat and climate resilience for the landscape. It's going to minimize the need for weeding, mulching, and watering when we're using species, when we're using plant communities native to the ecoregion we find ourselves in. Ecoregion, right? Not USDA hardiness zones. So here's a graphic. I stole this from my friend's book, Planting in a Post-Wild World. It helps illustrate the structural layers we're talking about that we see in nature and that we parse out when we're selecting our native plants for our natural landscapes. So where you're going to have the most biomass, the most plants is the ground cover. We will sometimes call that matrix or green mulch. I've shown you pictures of sedge dominated ground layers, also warm season bunch grasses like little blue stem Cytodes grama, blue grama. And then you have your seasonal theme layer, which is masses and drifts of forbs that are blooming at different times throughout the growing season. And then finally, you have the last layer, the structural layer or the architectural layer, where you have small trees or shrubs, large herbaceous perennials like Joe Pieweed there that can get 6 to 8, 9 feet tall. And those will have the least number of plants for you. But so this helps us, just parse out what nature is doing out in the wild so that we can apply it into our home landscapes. Here's another place, right? So if you do have a prairie nearby, and we all do, we really all do, go out there and explore it different times of the year, see what's blooming, see how those plants are growing together within the communities that they have established on their own without too much interference from us, maybe just the occasional burning if it's a wilder, larger space. And there certainly is no wood mulch here. Nature is not out there. We don't see squirrels and bison out there spreading wood mulch every spring. I don't know why we do that. We got to stop that. We need more plants. We're all gardeners. We're all plantaholics. You have my permission to buy a ton of plants and cram them into every last empty square inch you have in your landscape. It's a good thing. See, that's what we did here with these two spaces. We want that density. We want those layers that we see out in the wild. This is what makes it sustainable and climate resilient, providing maximum ecosystem services and benefits to wildlife. So plant those flowers in drifts and masses. This is going to help your garden, your landscape show purpose, show cohesion, show that there's a design intent behind it. Don't just throw out a bag of seed, especially in the front yard, and just sort of hope that everything's going to come up and look good, because it will take 10 years to self-organize and maybe look good. So let's use, you might have 3 Asclepias tuberosa orange butterfly weed together. You might have a drift of 15 Allium cernuum nodding onion, and then repeat those masses and drifts throughout the landscape, because repetition again shows purpose. Our eyes are almost trained to see repetition and use that repetition to find logic and comfort in a wilder landscape. Employ paths and benches and arbors and sculptures. These are cues to care, right? These things invite humans in and again show that the landscape has purpose and intention. Place a sign explaining the purpose and benefit of lawn transition. I have been told time and again by city weed inspectors that when there's a sign in the landscape, it does a world of good. communicating to neighbors, showing intent, showing purpose, and maybe not so much convincing neighbors to do what you're doing, but at least exposing them to a new way of thinking. And it's slow, this process, getting others to think like this. I am a strong believer, especially in front yard landscapes, landscapes next to driveways and sidewalks, of keeping plants lower. That means choosing plants that tend to be shorter. I prefer to design with plants that are 2 to 3 feet tall at most. I think 2 feet for the majority of species is a really good way to go. We don't want to impede sight lines. We don't want plants to get so tall that they're flopping over and bopping into people as they walk their dogs on the sidewalk. We want these landscapes to be approachable, and they can still be incredibly dynamic, incredibly resilient, and incredibly beneficial to wildlife in the ecosystem, even if we're not using things like common milkweed that get 55 feet tall and spread 1,000 feet in every direction. That's my knock on common milkweed in a small urban front yard landscape. Don't use it. This picture I've been using a lot, headquarters here. So most of these species, 2 to 3 feet tall. The tallest one is probably going to be the rattlesnake master there on the bottom left, blooming white, Orangium bucifolium. That might get to 4 feet tall. If it was in a loamy soil, it'd probably get to 5 feet tall, but this is clay soil. It gets very dry, cracks in it in the middle of summer. So that helps impede the height a little bit, which is beneficial for me. Here's a map of a diagram of a client space, just showing you how the shorter species are in the front, taller species are in the middle of the back. And we're just using just a device. This is a small space. This is like 200 or 300 square foot bed right here, but we've used 10 to 12 species so that we always have something blooming at least for about every 2 to 3 week period during the growing season, which from here is going to be May to about mid-September, late September. All right, these are all beautiful, but my gosh, how do you start it, right? You have a lawn, what do you do to prep it? There are a couple different methods. These methods all depend on how good your back and knees are, how much time you have. If you're in a rush to make it look good ASAP so your HOA doesn't get upset with you. Sheet mulching is one a lot of people like to use, right? Putting cardboard or newspaper on top of the grass to kill it, maybe putting some topsoil or mulch on top of there. This process can take a long time. And if you're doing a 10,000 square foot space or a 5,000 square foot space, you're probably not going to find enough cardboard to do it. Solarizing, I'm not a fan of it because it creates so much plastic waste and it kills soil life because it's literally cooking the soil. So I tried to tell people, don't do this. It also takes an entire growing season. So I can't imagine neighbors enjoying seeing 1,000 square feet of plastic in front of your house for 4 or 5 months. Sod cutter is immediate. It's quick. Those are unwieldy machines. I don't like using them. I don't like breathing in the toxic fumes, but they get rid of the lawn right away. The problem is it's also massive site disturbance. You are exposing weed seeds to germinating in the sunlight ASAP as soon as that sod is removed. My preferred method always creates lots of controversy. So if you've already read the book, you've read that section, which I tried to gingerly approach. Usually 1 spray kill of a glyphosate-based product take care of it, minimizes site disturbance. We have far fewer weeds. The dead grass creates a nice mulch and adding nutrients to the soil, and we just plant straight into it after the grass is dead in about 2 weeks. You can create a plan for your landscape however you want. I'm a very organic designer. I know my plants, the plants know me. We're all kumbaya. So I just design on site for most of my landscapes, but a plan can be very helpful as you start out with, and they can be as rough as the image on the left, just a bunch of little blurry blobs here and there representing different species, masses, and drifts, or you can be very specific and very anal, have a grid pattern where, every box is 1 square foot or 2 square foot, and then put all your blobs and plant markers out that way. This is what the space looks like when we're planting after the lawn has been killed and we're using our plugs. talk about plugs in a second. Well, we'll talk about it right now. We are putting plugs on 12-inch centers, sometimes even tighter. We might do our matrix, our ground cover layer of sedges and warm season bunch grasses every 12 inches, and then come in with our masses and drifts of forbs and plant them among there. So we might be at 6-inch or 8-inch centers. You want that density, right? You want to get the ground covered ASAP for weed seedling competition, reducing site erosion. That's another benefit for having dead lawn on site. If you live on if you have a sloped landscape, you want to leave that in place. It will greatly reduce your erosion, practically eliminating it 100%. I showed you an image a couple slides ago of a parking lot landscape. We did that at a 45-degree angle. We killed the sod and left it in place, and we had no erosion issues, which I was ecstatic about. I was concerned. Why use plugs? Well, the cost benefit is immense. Look at that huge 1-gallon pot in the middle. You go to a big box nursery, it costs $15 to $20. Why not get a 2.5-inch pot that costs $5? You can get 3 or 4 of those for the same cost as a 1-gallon pot, or you can get a 50 plug tray. That's going to be $100 to $120. Do the math, the cost benefit is incredible. All the plants will be established about the same time. They'll grow about the same rate. I find that plugs establish pretty gosh darn quickly because their root system isn't in as much shock, right? There's not as much roots in that root ball to go through the shock period. And they just establish and touch the native soil on site quicker, get established quicker, get going. Unless we have a massive drought, then you got to water. All right, so here's our base layer, our matrix plan. So let's imagine this is a 100 square foot bed. Each square block is 1 foot by 1 foot. All those green dots are our ground cover layer, our green mulch, our matrix. Those green dots can be sedge, they can be warm season bunch grasses, whatever you want. We come in and we add some forbs. This is not enough forbs for this place. I don't think you can have too many flowers, but I guess it depends on the flower species, right? You probably don't want to put a Baptisia australis here because that thing's going to get 4 by 4 feet tall and just totally take over the space. That's why I use Baptisia australis minor here, which is a shorter, more compact species. It's not a cultivar, it's a species. It gets about 2 feet by 2 feet usually, sometimes 3 feet tall. So there you go. You can see, so it's not just 12-inch centers when you bring in the flowers, when you bring in the forbs, there's a lot more density here. So it's mimicking what we find in nature much more. And so while you have put these plants out in a specific intentional way at planting, they are not going to stay like this. And that's okay. That's good. That's what we want. We want them to move around and self-sow and adapt and show us what they want. We need to learn from them. Before we start to come in with a heavy hand and be like, nope, you shouldn't be over there. Nope, you shouldn't be over there. I mean, take Rudbeckia Herta there, Black-Eyed Susan. It's a biennial, right? So it's going to look pretty the first year. It's going to self-sow like the dickens. You probably have lots of Black-Eyed Susans the first couple years, and then after about year 4, you won't have more than 1 or 2, right? Because it's an early succession species. It does its thing early in the landscape healing process before all the other perennials can establish and fill in and outcompete. And then it slowly fades away once all the other plants are established in the root zone and above the soil level. So here's how ugly, it does look ugly right after planting. We will often kill our lawn, put in a 1-inch mulch layer just to help with some of the weed seed germination, lower that a little bit, help with soil moisture a tiny little bit. Plus it also just makes it look tidy to neighbors. For some reason, mulch equates to tidiness with neighbors who would otherwise, or probably who still look at this landscape as being, whoa, what did they do here? That's crazy, that's messy, that's nuts. But mulch is a good way to sort of calm things. But this is all going to be green next year. We planted this in June. This is all going to be wonderful 2-foot tall mini meadow here on a very busy street here in Lincoln, Nebraska. So what tools do you use? Now I'm a professional, or my cat calls me a professional. We use mixing drills with solid steel core augers. So mixing drills are a lot better than your standard household drills. They will last a lot longer. Their motors won't blow out. And if you got clay soil, they're going to have lower RPM. So they're a lot and much more torque, so they can handle that clay soil. We will easily plant thousands of plugs a day with one of these machines, and it doesn't break a sweat. I do, but the plants don't. I mean, the drill doesn't. You can do this sort of thing in a huge landscape, a medium-sized landscape, or just a really narrow foundation bed, like in front of this elementary school, right? You can do a 2-foot deep bed with a matrix, a ground cover, a sedge here, as we did here, Carex albicans, and just bring in a few different forbs. This is on the north side of the building, so we did shade-tolerant flower species. Let's see, what is it, January 24th? You know, in about 2 months, I'm going to be taking a lawnmower to our backyard meadow here at headquarters. Every 2 years, I go in and rake it out so that sunlight can hit the seeds, so they can flower seeds, so they can germinate a little bit more easily. Unfortunately, I live within city limits, so I can't burn. I would love to burn this space up every couple of years. That would really help the flower species, especially because over time, grasses start to outcompete flower species, unless you've done a really good job selecting flower species that can hold their own with our native bunch grasses. That's a whole nother topic, right? I'll meet you out back afterwards. We'll have a drink and talk about it. Now, lawns certainly do seem easier to manage than these landscapes because in large part, we grew up being forced by our parents to go outside and mow the lawn. It's relatively easy, right? You mow once a week, you water once or twice a week, you fertilize whenever the TV commercials tell you to, which is way too often. So they're easy in that way, right? Doesn't mean they're more environmentally benign, but they're easy. Now, managing a more diverse garden means knowing the plants a little bit more, letting them teach you what they want, where they want to be, and you'll need to be able to go with the flow, so to speak, as the landscape changes from month to month and year to year. That's what's so cool. I don't want my landscape to look the same every year. It's not the living room, okay? It's not the same painting on the wall for 20 years. Natural garden is not. It's not more work than lawn, especially once it's been established, and especially if you've chosen some really solid species that are going to work together in their plant communities. So some last minute inspirational photos here. Again, this is headquarters. This is where I do so much of my experimentation. So before I ever go to a client's house and mess up their landscape, I'm messing mine up first, right? So this must be August. Yeah, this looks like August. And then we move into the fall, mid-September, mid-October, late October. This is my favorite time of year. I think the spring and summer garden is just atrociously ugly. Well, maybe not atrociously ugly. My aesthetic, my personality exists here in this time, in this place. And especially when my neighbor's lawnmowers start to go silent and I can enjoy the space a little bit more. I'm not breathing in all those toxic fumes and having the noise pollution. I can actually hear birds. Here's the space in winter with some rime, freezing fog. Leave those gardens up for winter. So many ecosystem services, and they really do look beautiful, especially if you have densely planted them with natural layers. If you just have plants spaced apart, every 2 or 3 feet, apart, it's not going to look like this. It's not going to look interesting in the winter, and the ecosystem services will be far, far less. Autumn, summer, autumn, summer. God, that looks like the book cover on the right. If you have a larger space, this was a client's acreage. I think it was a 1 acre lot, pretty big actually. So we did a 25 foot deep border around 3 sides of their backyard, sowed in side oats grama, bunch grass for our ground cover layer, did masses and drifts of forbs in there. Side oats grama just took off. It's probably one of my favorite grasses to use as far as sowing. So we will plug these flowers and forbs in, and then we will come in and broadcast side oats grama by seed, and it will go right into dead grass and germinate easily. And side oats grama, Bouteloua, curtipendula, establishes so much faster than any other short native bunch grass that I've experimented with. So that's why I like to use it. It outcompetes weeds quickly on most sites in most years. I use the most as caveat because we've had some terrible droughty summers where, without supplemental irrigation, it just can't get going as quickly as I would like it to. All right, more final inspiration or desperation, I suppose. this is the point where I want to encourage you. I don't want you to be dissuaded. This is a big risk when you're taking your front yard and you're converting it to a more natural looking landscape. I live in a neighborhood where many people don't, if they have foundation beds, they're really narrow, maybe 3 feet deep. They have, a few shrubs scattered far apart, all in a straight line, like in a firing line. Many of the houses don't even have any foundation plants around the house or even any trees. It's just lawn straight up to the concrete walls. So you are destabilizing the status quo. And I think it's awesome. I think it's hot and I think it's sexy. We need more of this. Just be prepared that sometimes the hardest part of doing this work is not the researching the plants, the prepping the site, the planting, the management of the first few years, making sure all the bad perennial weeds don't show up. And the hardest work can be fighting or defending the space and talking to your neighbors and just helping them see the benefits of this, or at least give them a beer so they don't completely despise you. But we need more of this is what I'm trying to say, and we can do it, and we are doing it. The tide is turning so much, I feel, in the last year. This is such important work, so I am just pontificating for no reason. You probably live in a space like this. That's my house in the bottom center. I yearn to live on 20,000 acres of prairie. This is where I am, and I think it's been a good place to start this dialogue to help this movement move forward, because this is unsustainable. This is simply not healthy, not just for wildlife, but as much, or if not more so, it's unhealthy for us. Okay, I can't imagine the clouds of pollution being emitted from this landscape as my neighbor's lawnmowers literally hum for 12 hours a day, every day during the growing season. I use my lawnmower once or twice a month. So my plea to you, you're here, I'm talking to the choir, that's okay. The choir needs energizing all the time. My plea to you is to always is to rethink pretty. What is pretty to us? What is pretty to other species? What does pretty mean in a time of mass extinction and climate change? It's something very different. Pretty is awesome. I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. If you ever need any help, let me know. So there we go. I told you I would leave plenty of time for question and answers because I want to have a good, healthy, productive conversation. So thank you for listening to this mini presentation, and we'll see if Heather has any initial questions to get us going.
Yeah, we've got a couple of great ones here. So first couple ones are going to mostly be about site prep. So someone wants to know, oh, hold on one second. After spraying, can you spread seeds directly onto the dead turf?
Yes, you can. There's a couple caveats to that. I obviously it will take 1 to 2 weeks for the turf to be dead, and that depends on how hot it was when you sprayed the lawn, how hot it is a few days after spraying. But yes, I do that all the time. I talked about Cytots grama, Bouteloua critipendula. We sow that straight into the dead lawn. By the time you do it, there won't be any residual. That residual is just for the first couple of days. So, and that's not that it's wet or dangerous to walk on or anything. It's usually just a couple hours when it's safe to walk on. But I'm trailing off right now. Yes, you can seed right into it. The caveat here is that there are some flower species, or a lot of flower species, that need sunlight to germinate, right? So the seeds need to touch the soil, so they got to find their way down to the dirt, and then they need sunlight, which can be tricky if that dead lawn is too tall or too dense. So sometimes if we are killing a lawnscape where the lawn has been meticulously managed and maintained, it's very thick, it's very tall, it's very lush. After it's killed, we'll come in and we'll scalp it down and we'll rake it out. So we have like, an inch and a half tall dead grass layer, and then when you rake it out, you have more gaps, more sunlight hitting the soil, more places for seed to actually contact and touch the soil. So there are always caveats.
Okay, so if you go the route of using a sod cutter, someone wants to know, should you then add additional compost or topsoil?
No, you won't need to. You are hopefully doing your research, and this is the most important aspect of planning these landscapes, any garden really. So you have done your research, making sure that the plants you are using are fitted to the soil conditions you have underneath that sod layer that you have now removed. A lot of our native plants, and I'm speaking from a prairie perspective, and I'm certainly speaking from the center of the country when I say this. A lot of our native prairie plants do not want that rich soil. They will grow, if you put compost on there, it's way too many nutrients that being put into the soil. They will grow too tall, they will get floppy, they will have shorter lifespan. And I also find that when you don't add compost, that means you have less weeds because you're giving them less Gatorade, less juice, right? So I am personally not a fan of that.
Okay, so you talked about common milkweed not being a good option. Someone wants to know if you think world milkweed is a better option.
Yeah, the cool thing, or you may not think it's a cool thing about that species, is that it tends to self-sow around, especially in the early years of the landscape where there are gaps in the plant layers to do so, where it's easier for it to get going, germinate, and establish. So yeah, I like that plant. There's all kinds of different plants to use in the landscape. You will read books by Pete Outdolf and folks like that who talk about scatter plants. And that's what that milkweed is. It's a scatter plant. So it's like there's an individual here, there's an individual over here, there's one over there. They're not good massing or drifting or clumping species. They just like to scatter themselves around the landscape. And it's cool to have some of those in the bed. It's cool to have some that are just behaved clumpers. Especially in a larger landscape. If you have like 100 square feet, I would strongly suggest using plant species that are behaved clumpers because you don't want any of those species to establish and to then just totally take over, because it's not like much better than having a lawn because you've developed a monoculture. So again, research is incredibly important, especially research as close to your zip code as you possibly can get.
Okay, so a couple of people are asking, what are your favorite recommendations for where to get native plugs?
Yeah, I only have one, and this is if you live in the center of the country, going to the Atlantic coast. That would be Isle native plants. They work with wholesale growers who primarily sell to landscapers and nurseries. So nurseries typically buy these plugs, also called liners in the tray, and they'll buy these, for minimal cost, and then they will pot them up in a 1-gallon plant and let them grow for a couple of months. So all of a sudden the plant is worth, 10 times, 15 times more. They can sell it for more. So yeah, Isle native plants, IZEL. West Coast, I don't know. Your Google search is as good as mine there.
Okay, so someone wants to know, do you use a single species for your matrix, or do you use several species intermingled or in drifts?
Can I say it depends again? It does depend. Usually I'm using a single species to start out with, especially since most of my clients are new to this type of design, and to the kind of management that these landscapes require, because it's different than a traditional garden as far as management goes. So yeah, I'm usually just using one species for that matrix or ground layer. I will say that, I especially like to experiment in shade gardens using several different species of sedge in that matrix or ground cover layer. And I have started to do where, like, I'll have an area of Carex albicans, white tinged sedge, as the primary matrix. This might be over 200 square feet or something. And then I'll come in and I'll do a drift of a different sedge species, something that gets a little bit taller. Maybe the foliage is a little bit thicker, like Carex springalii. It's called Sprengel sedge is the common name. We'll see what happens, how they spread. I'm a little unsure how they will spread and mingle with each other, but we'll find out. And then, so you've got Carex albicans, you have Carex springalii. You could even come in. So those are basically clumping species, and they'll sow around a little bit. You could even come in there and use some Carex pennsylvanica, pen sedge, Pennsylvania sedge, which is even shorter than these other two species I just mentioned. So it can, and it runs around by root runners a little bit, so it can fill in the gaps between these other clumping sedge species. So this is where you can really build up that ground cover layer, and you can always find more plants to put in that, 1 foot tall range ground cover layer. There's always little gaps you can cram something into. And the lovely thing about doing that is that most people walking by will never notice. All they'll see is this cohesive green base cover, this cohesive green base layer, and they'll never know that you have 20 species of ground cover in there, benefiting 20 different species of pollinators. So, but I think that's more like an advanced level, right? Once you start to experiment with the space, understand how the space is working for you and how the plants grow over 4, 5, 50 years.
Okay, so a couple of people are asking about weeds and how to manage them. So thistle has come up, creeping Charlie, and then also people are asking about what you think about dandelions.
Oh, God, those are lots of questions. Let's do dandelions. I have no problem with them. I do not advocate spraying them. I do not advocate removing them. They're here. The cat's out of the bag. I actually kind of like the basal foliage because it stays really low to the ground and covers the ground. So I always like, and I don't see this as much as I want to because other plants are competing, but I love to see dandelions popping up in my beds where there are gaps because instead of having a thistle germinating there, I just have a dandelion, and those big, thick dandelion leaves are shading the soil, preventing seeds from germinating because those seeds need sunlight, right? So I kind of like it as that ground cover, ground layer, mixed in there with more desirable native plant species. So weeds is a really complex topic. It depends so much on your site, your ecoregion, what you're seeing. I mean, a thistle means a lot of things to me. We have beneficial native thistles. You turn a leaf over, it tends to be a bright silver for our native species. Not always the case, but usually. So we do have beneficial native plant species. When I hear thistle, I hear musk thistle, and that's just, it's a biennial. You can dig it out if you want to, or after it flowers, you immediately cut the head off and throw it in the trash so you can't set seed, and then it never comes back. It's a biennial, right? It's done. Most of the weed problems we have on new installations are annual weeds, crabgrass, foxtail. So again, these are annuals. They will get outcompeted in the first year if the plants get going as good and as fast as we hope they will, as we plan for them to do. That's why I'm a fan of sowing in that matrix layer of a warm season bunch grass and then coming in with a forb layer. So we're getting fast establishment. So yeah, I tend to just let those annual weeds do their thing because I know they're going to fade away over time. If it's a highly visible space and the crabgrass is getting really thick, then you need to actively manage it the first year. That can just be hand cutting twice a month. Crabgrass is going to bloom late summer, early fall, something like that. But I have had experience with it, and it does fade fast into the second year. Somebody said creeping Charlie. That's a really, really hard one. I think it's really important to get creeping Charlie under control, if not as close to 100% eradicated as you possibly can before you do anything in the landscape. I've found that it does not do well with competition from taller plants. That does not mean that's going to be the case in your ecoregion, because all these ecoregions, all these little different microclimates around our houses are so vastly different. We have plants that grow one way in our landscape, and down the street at our neighbor's house, the plant's growing yet another way. That's just the joy and the despair of working with wild plants who have wills of their own. So yeah, I'm done with that one. I hope I covered that well, guys.
Yeah, so actually, speaking of creeping Charlie, someone is asking about people saying that you shouldn't mow your lawn until June to protect the insects. And I know I see bees visiting creeping Charlie in my lawn. So what do you recommend about that?
I don't have a lawn. Oh, that was my sarcastic response. Yeah, this no mow May, I am almost 100% against this movement. What I like about it is that it's encouraging people to let plants do their things and not be so domineering and intensive about managing their landscape. But instead of no mow May, let's have no lawn May, no lawn June, no lawn July. As far as insects visiting these non-native exotic flowers, it tends to mostly be non-native exotic bee species coming to visit. You're going to see a lot of honeybees, right? Personally, I don't care about honeybees. They're not very effective pollinators. They spread disease to our native bee species. They outcompete our native bee species for resources. I want to see as many native plant species as I can. And finally, when you don't mow, I think it really does look scraggly. It really does look ugly to most of your neighbors. It really does look like you just let the landscape go and don't care. I think that's the last thing we want to do. And finally, you're giving weeds, potentially bad weeds, noxious weeds, perennial weeds, a chance to flower and set seed. That is not something you want to be doing. You don't want to give them a chance to propagate themselves. So for those reasons, I am 90% not a no-mow fan. That will probably get me into trouble, but this is a common feeling among a lot of folks I know.
So someone is asking, should you leave the leaves on your native plants?
That depends. You probably don't want to leave a 2-foot layer of leaves in there, but yes, you absolutely should. There's no reason to rake out leaves from your native plant beds, especially if you are creating spaces, that look like this, right? These are dense, thickly layered spaces where we want leaves. We want dead plant material to be biodegraded and improve the soil and open up the soil, aerate the soil, provide life for soil microorganisms. Leave your leaves, absolutely, because you're also going to have caterpillars overwintering underneath those leaves. You're going to have adult queen bumblebees overwintering. You're going to have spiders and amphibians overwintering underneath those leaves. So don't rip off their blanket. Don't take the roof off their house. Leave it there. Let nature do its thing.
So Karen has a question about, could you explain how to use something besides hardiness zones to determine what will grow in your yard?
Yes, where's my book? I should have a copy of my book right here. Wait, I'm going to lean over and hopefully my headphone doesn't come out. Yes, let's go to the ecoregion map. Hardiness zones tells you just one thing. It tells you how cold it's going to get in the winter and if that plant can survive. So I'm going to go away from this screen. Oops, I'm going to do that. All right, can you see that map, guys? That's your ecoregion map, level 3, that the US provides for us. You can see there's a lot of ecoregions in our country. You want to be using plants native to your ecoregion, okay? So you buy the book, buy the book. Oh, I feel like a drug salesman. All right, page 28 to page 29. That's where you can also just Google the ecoregion map as well. So you want to be planting. So ecoregions is about making sure that the plants are adapted to your climate, soil, all kinds of different things that I explain in the book. Again, USDA, those hardiness zones, that's just winter hardiness. And again, zone 7 on the East Coast, way different than zone 7 on the West Coast. Those plant communities are polar opposites from one another. You're going to have very few of the same plants, right? So zones don't tell us enough, and really I find them quite inaccurate. So I could talk about that forever, but I think that's enough.
Can you speak to using true native plants versus native plant cultivars?
Oh yeah, that's a toughie. Let me see if I can do that. You guys are giving me tough questions. I feel like some of you are like you came here to get me. That's good. I like it. Okay, so cultivars. Yeah, there's a lot of debate about this, and my feelings have changed a little bit over the years. I think absolutely we should be using 100% straight species as much as we can. Straight species means species that have not been altered, at least by humans, not bred by humans. This is totally a terrible explanation. I say it so much better in the book. I should just read from it. The big issue for me with cultivars is that so many of them, at least when we're talking about cultivars that humans have bred purposely to get a specific trait, like a different flower color or different height or something. The biggest issue for me is that cultivars are propagated asexually. They are all clones of one another. So you literally have the same plant planted all across the country. That is not good for climate resilience, for genetic diversity. If disease comes in, it's going to wipe out all those species. There's no genetic resilience diversity in those plant species. Now, when we are, when we change bloom color, when we change leaf color, this is often very suspect, can even be very detrimental to species who rely on those native plant species to use as far as raising their young, their larvae, or collecting pollen. When you change the petal color of a flower, you are affecting. You are changing the UV runway lights that communicate with pollinators. You may also be changing pollen and nectar nutrition levels. So a bee comes to the plant expecting X protein count in the pollen. Turns out that it's actually half that, but they don't know that, and they can't figure out why over the next couple of weeks they're not growing. And finally, when we're talking about cultivars, we have wild hybrids of native plants, because that's what native plants do. They're constantly hybridizing out in the wild. And then we have human created hybrids essentially in the lab. So there are a lot of nuances to cultivars. When you are changing the petal color and the leaf color, I want you to stay away from those plants. When we're changing the height, I think that's okay. I just wish we had more open pollinated cultivars, but we don't, because we want to have nurseries and landscape designers. They want and they need to have a known quantity on the shelves, right? They need to know how the plant is how it's going to grow and how it's going to perform. So that's why we have clones, asexual reproduction. We have the same plant everywhere across the country. But again, it's just not smart for resilience. So again, it's said better in the book, so I probably botched that horribly.
Okay, so a couple of people are asking about borders. So someone noticed that you don't use any hard borders, you mostly use lawn for borders. And do you have any issues with grass or sod creeping in that you have to mitigate?
Yeah, let's go back. Where's that going? Here we go. So yeah, again, this is front yard at headquarters. I don't have any issues. You think I would? That's blue stem and Cytotes grama. They both self-sow fairly aggressively, depending again on time of year and all kinds of things. How much moisture we've had. But you can see there in that bottom right corner, my neighbor waters a lot, mows a lot. The grass is very thick and lush because they fertilize a lot and put a lot of herbicides down. So nothing has spread over there, because that is an impeccably maintained landscape where nothing can get going. And this is the same on both sides of my suburban lot. So yeah, I'm not using a border there. And you know what? Even if I was to use a border, it would have to be like 10 feet or something, because plants fly, they move, they hitchhike on birds and rabbits and things like that. So there is no border made that's going to prevent spreading. If you're worried about your plants spreading to your neighbor, don't choose plants that are aggressive by roots or aggressive by sowing. More behaved species. Again, this is where research is so incredibly important. Now, if you need this space to look a little bit more formal, a little bit more tidy on the edges, then yeah, you can do something. You could do some metal edging or something, but I think it would have to be very tall metal edging, because these plants are going to quickly get tall and arch over and cover it. So it would have to be like 6 or 12-inch tall metal edging to even see it. So that's my super long explanation about what we're doing there in this image.
Okay, so somebody wants to know, what is your favorite time to seed, spring or fall?
My favorite time of year to seed, is that what you said, Heather?
Yeah.
It depends. Different species need to be sowed at different times of year. Our warm season bunch grasses, again, little blue stem, Cytotes grama, blue grama, those have to be sown in spring and early summer. Otherwise, they do not have enough time to develop their root systems and make it through the winter. So I'm not going to be sowing them in July and August, because they don't have enough time to establish before the soil freezes in the fall. Same thing with annual flowers, right? They need to be sown in the spring. I have these lists in the book, actually, and you're going to get 40% off today. I have these lists of which species to sow when, and that's just for, this one part of the country. But yeah, there are perennial flower species that you can sow in May and June and July. Most of the seeding we do has to occur during the dormant season, after we have a couple hard freezes in the fall. So late October, early November, even into this time of year, mid to late January, we'll still be sowing the bulk of our flower species and our sedge species in our cool season grass species, because there's cool season grass species and there's warm season grass species. So again, it depends on the species of plant that you're putting out there when you sow it. But for most of the things we're doing, it's a winter dormant sowing.
Okay, so somebody wants to know how you manage squirrels digging up new plants or plugs once they are put in.
Yeah, I've always wondered, we've had a few clients who, especially in the fall, noticed some of their plugs had been removed. I've always thought it was raccoons and not squirrels, because squirrels, aren't eating roots and stuff. But I tell clients it's usually not a huge problem. It's usually like 10 plants or something like that. And I just tell clients, go out there, walk out there once a day in the fall before the soil freezes and pop those plants right back in the ground. You're not going to have a problem obviously once the plants root out in the first year or first 6 months or something, and the density increases. That's the same thing with rabbits. I'll probably get a question here pretty soon about how do you control rabbits, keep them from eating your plants? Well, you can't. But I will tell you, one of their favorite species, flower species to eat for me is Dahlia purpurea, purple prairie clover. It's just like M&Ms or popping chips out of a bag or something for them. When our gardens are young and that dahlia is trying to get going, the rabbits come to it quickly because it's exposed, it's open. It doesn't have any bodyguards around it to hide it from the rabbits. And once your garden grows up the first couple years, thickens up, those layers get going, you do have a lot of bodyguards around those plants. And the dahlia, the purple prairie clover, it will remain mostly untouched, if not completely untouched, because the rabbits just don't see it, can't find it as easily. I guess they're stupid.
Okay, somebody wants to know how you estimate costs for prairie planting.
Yeah, I think I did that a little bit in the book too. Again, you guys are going to hate me today. It depends, right? It depends on if you're sowing, depends on if you're sowing and using plugs. It depends on if you're using just plugs. It depends on how big your site is, right? And how fast you want it to get going. Obviously, plugs are going to get going several years faster than a project that's sown. Plus, you can control the design a little bit more, or a lot more. So how do I estimate? I don't know if that's a professional question or a personal question, as far as like I'm just a homeowner and I'm trying to do this, or if somebody is asking for a bid. Let me think about it. So, let's say you're using those trays of 50 plugs, and that costs $120. So each plug is, let's just say each plug is basically $1, and each plug covers 1 square foot. You can start from there estimating, right? So $1 per 1 square foot roughly. And there you go, depending on if you're putting a thin mulch layer or what else you're doing. And that's if it's a DIY thing. Obviously, if you're using somebody like me, bringing in my expertise and my crew and my labor, it's a lot different.
Okay, so do you plant the matrix first, or do you plant the architectural layer?
Oh, that's another great question. You guys are on today, man. Me personally, what do I do personally? That's a good question. I never really thought about this because I'm such an artsy fartsy organic sort of guy when I'm on site. No, I'm usually doing the forbs first, and those forbs are and I'm usually doing the architectural forbs first, right? Because those are going to be the tallest, most showiest in general because of their height. So I'll probably come in and do my masses and drifts of rattlesnake master or Rhingium mucifolium first, echinaceas, taller things like that. I'll do first, and I'll come in and I'll do my seasonal forb flower layer, do those mass and drifts, and then we'll come in and do the ground cover forbs, and then finally put in the matrix of grasses or sedges. Because the matrix of grass and sedges, that's easy. I don't even need to be there for my crew. I can just say, all right, here's the, you know what to do. You put a grid out every 12 inches, do it, get to it. I'm gonna go have a cigarette break over here. Don't smoke, it's not good for you. So yeah, that's how I do it. That doesn't mean that's how you'll do it.
Okay, so it looks like we probably have time for about one more. So what is your preferred plant selection tool, besides your book, of course? So someone talks about using Audubon Plants for Birds, wildflower.org, state-specific websites. Do you have any
Yeah.
recommendations?
Yeah, I love Illinois wildflowers just as a baseline. I know it's based in Illinois, so it might not be, you might be in New Jersey, Florida, or Washington State. But I like Illinois wildflowers. I like Missouri Botanical Gardens, Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. Prairie Moon Nursery is handy for not just learning about plants, but learning about germination codes for plants, telling me when they need to be sown. Is also helping me calculate the weight of seeds, how many seeds I need to be putting out in the landscape if I'm doing a seeding project. Those are the big ones. You will find regional sources, websites, university extensions, regional guidebooks, regional natural books. So yeah, that's my answer. Good questions, guys.
All right, so it's time to announce the winners of our giveaway. So the winners are Kimberly Barenfuss and Michael Godert. So congratulations, you have each won a copy of Prairie Up. So I will email you after this event ends and to get your addresses so I can send you a copy of the book. If anybody else wants to purchase one, just a reminder, you can use code Prairie Up on our website to get 40% off. And that code is good for the next couple of days. I think it's good for about a week. So go ahead and order that if you'd like to get a copy. Do you have any final thoughts for us, Benjamin, before we sign off?
Kill your lawn, guys. Thanks for doing it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. We should have the recording up tomorrow and we'll send it around to everyone. Thank you.